mind-blowing nuclear news coming your way. First up, price action. The Sprott Uranium Miners ETF last week was up 3%, while the S&P 500 broader market was down 2%. This is not insignificant outperformance. This is massive outperformance, building on top of the even bigger outperformance last week, which we covered. And so uranium is outperforming every single other asset class because it's early stage. The market is finally discovering what we've been talking about for weeks. And so here we are digging up even more pertinent information to early stage investors who are going to take advantage of this long-term wave. Now, let's start out with what we know. As of today, uranium demand is projected to skyrocket over the coming years. This comes from the World Nuclear Association via the Visual Capitalist. And so just huge growth for this scarce commodity. We're looking at something like 60,000 tons in 2020, jumping to 110,000 tons required by 2040, on its way to double over time. We also know the uranium supply is extremely scarce, and that is the bedrock of the uranium bull case, right? Supply-demand fundamentals are everything in commodities, and uranium has the absolute best supply-demand fundamentals right now. So let's look at the math behind this supply crunch. This comes from Campaglia, the CEO of Sprott, which is taking circulating pounds off the market in the midst of the supply crunch, making the squeeze even worse. Campaglia said there is already a major supply and demand imbalance to justify higher prices. He noted that 130 million pounds of uranium were produced last year. However, demand is expected to rise above 180 million pounds this year and could surpass 200 million pounds in the next few years. Looking at just Japan's announcement, Campaglia said the nuclear power plants will use about 500,000 pounds of uranium each year. With Japan restarting 17 plants, the nation will need more than 8 million pounds of the metal annually. It doesn't feel too far out of reach for the price to get back to $100 per pound. Prices have to go higher if you're going to fill the growing supply gap. And so with that in mind, let's look at the history of uranium price action and see what happens in periods like this when demand is absolutely skyrocketing. Here is a chart from Katusa Research showing mega booms and busts in uranium prices since 1930. So this is the entire history of uranium prices. Whenever we see a pickup like we just saw in the early 2020s, that uptrend in the black line, whenever we see a pickup like that, uranium price either skyrockets 12x or 14x. That's just history. If you look at whenever demand picks up like this, there is absolutely massive growth in the price of uranium. We had a boom time in 1970 and we had a boom time in the early 2000s. And so I think while this may seem like a long period, I think we're still in the early stages of the nuclear renaissance because this story is just now playing out. There have been some hiccups along the way in terms of the mass adoption of nuclear power. But this chart just shows that all-time highs are in reach. There's an uptrend, and we are in the absolute perfect sweet spot for a supply crunch to take place as we emerge from the uranium winter. And so here's a chart of the current spot price, again, making higher lows if you just zoom out and look at the long-term uptrend. So now this only matters if the future is bright and the future is bullish and we continuously see bullish development. So let's dive through some news and figure out what the future is actually going to look like for nuclear power. Well, South Korea boosts the nuclear power target for 2030 to meet tougher climate goal. This is massive if you look at the shift. So the old plan had renewables at 30%. That was their goal. Well, something changed because now they only want 22%. That is a huge decrease in renewable power demand for South Korea. Why did that happen? Maybe because they're looking around the world, looking at how it failed miserably in Europe and how they can't really rely on it. Maybe they're looking at all the statistics about how dense and powerful nuclear energy is and how sustainable it is long-term, because you can see that nuclear gained the majority of the share lost by renewable power. And so this is just a global trend happening everywhere. We are U-turning. UK's Johnson pledges millions to fund new nuclear plant. Britain's outgoing Prime Minister Boris Johnson has pledged 700 million pounds, 800 million of government funding for a new nuclear power plant. Now, maybe that's because the world is waking up, especially the UK. UK inflation could top 22% next year, warns Goldman Sachs. That is hyperinflationary levels. They better get their energy in line, and the world is rushing into the absolute best solution, which is nuclear power. And so here's another government waking up fast. California lawmakers vote to keep last nuclear plant online. Late night vote puts Diablo Canyon's fate in federal hands. Owner PG&E must now win federal money license extensions. And so this tells you everything you need to know. The only reason uranium was so depressed in the last few years was because this U-turn was not priced in. Well, now it's happening, and uranium prices are about to absolutely factor this in. That's why we're seeing massive outperformance. Speaking of U-turns, Swiss politicians petition for country to keep nuclear power. Switzerland is the latest country to get on board the nuclear power before countrywide blackouts trend. Following in the recent footsteps of countries like Germany, in fact, a group of Swiss politicians has launched a petition with the intent of revising the country's energy policy to keep nuclear as part of the mix as a way to guarantee having enough power going forward. And so this global renaissance just continues to play out like clockwork. Now, this is all taking place, and we haven't even touched on geopolitics. White House to seek $11.7 billion in additional Ukraine aid. Bloomberg Business now reporting the $2 billion energy-related request includes $1.5 billion for uranium to fuel U.S. nuclear reactors with the aim of offsetting any decrease in Russian energy supplies. This is the biggest news story by far of the week. Just like the government subsidizes student loans in college and the price skyrockets, well, the government's subsidizing uranium and the price is absolutely going to skyrocket, dumping billions of dollars into the already tight uranium market. It does not get bigger than that. And so if the USA actually sanctions Russian uranium, or Russia pulls away from the US and refuses to supply uranium, that's going to cause an absolutely massive spike. And so the US is getting ready for that, dumping money into this market. Absolutely huge for US and North America uranium producers. And the US government realizes how crucial uranium is, because their agenda is to push nuclear power, which again, it doesn't get bigger than that. The US government is putting its weight behind nuclear energy. And so they're launching these advertising campaigns. Nuclear powers Maryland. Today is National Beach Day. Here in Maryland, we love the beach and everything to do with the ocean. But our shores are at risk. The climate crisis threatens our coastline. We need to embrace nuclear power and save our beaches. Here's where everything is moving, guys. We are early stage. Get ready. And so we know one threat to the entire uranium nuclear power bull thesis is a potential nuclear meltdown. There's only one at risk, and it's in the midst of the first shooting war in Europe in the last 80 years. So we've covered how safe nuclear energy is. It takes something drastic like this to cause even a little bit of a threat. So let's dive through the news on that. The International Atomic Energy Agency Director General Rafael Mariano Grossi says its experts are here to stay and will maintain a continued presence at this nuclear power plant. Grossi told reporters, it is obvious that the physical integrity of the plant had been violated several times by chance or deliberately. We don't have the elements to assess that, but this is the reality that we have to recognize. This is something that cannot continue to happen. He said that wherever you stand or whatever you think about this war, this is something that cannot happen. Grossi said that during his visit, which lasted a few hours, he saw a lot. I was able to tour the whole site. I went into the units. I could visit the emergency systems, the diesel generators, the control rooms. So we chose 3 or 4 key areas I needed to see firsthand. Of course, I was able to talk to the staff as well. He said he assured the staff that the IAEA was not going anywhere, with some of its experts remaining at the nuclear plant. So we're going to get accurate reporting from the IAEA. And so what we know is we have international agreement that this plant needs to stay safe, needs to stay open. The people most incentivized to keep this plant safe are the Russians and the Ukrainians. And so again, the only threat of anything happening is if one of those two parties does anything, and they're not going to want that to happen, right? And so this is a good sign. We're actually going to get real information instead of just fear-mongering. But if you're playing the odds of either of these two countries cutting off their nose to spite their face by destroying this nuclear power plant are low. So obviously, naturally, we see this big bullish price action. So we know Wall Street is involved. Bank of America forecasts uranium spot prices to rise to $70 per pound by 2023. Increased uranium purchases from financial market participants often correlates to higher prices. Loss of Russian supplies in Diablo Canyon nuclear plant extension could be bullish catalyst. We think uranium prices should continue a measured increase, peaking around $70 per pound in 2023. However, any loss of Russian supplies would make us more bullish. We just touched on this. The US is getting ready for a loss of Russian supplies, or at least preparing potentially for that to happen. In 2021, imports from Russia and Kazakhstan hit an all-time high from 22.9 million pounds, or 49% of total deliveries. Given Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we wonder if this might not swing back in favor of US allies. So this is an entirely different market than what we've seen in the past, and prices are just starting to reflect this. I hope that paints a pretty clear picture of what is going on in this market. The nuclear renaissance is unfolding rapidly and exponentially before our very eyes. We are early stage, and we will stay on top of this market.